In the introduction of The Sun Also Rises, narrator Jake Barnes tells the story of a group of disillusioned expatriates living in post-World War I Europe, searching for meaning as they travel, drink, and party. Jake had sustained an injury that made him impotent. He begins by describing his fellow writer and companion, Robert Cohn, who was a top boxer in college. Jake doesn't really like Cohn, but he tolerates him, even after Cohn falls for Jake's great love, Lady Brett Ashley. Brett, a divorced socialite, was a nurse during the war and cared for Jake after his injury. Jake spends little time working, preferring to party and drink with Cohn and the American writer Bill Gorton. While at a dance club one evening, Jake runs into Brett. The two sneak away to drink privately. Brett reveals she loves Jake, but is unwilling to give up sex to be with him. The two kiss and then part ways. In the rising action, Cohn claims to be in love with Brett. It turns out he and Brett have had a brief affair in San Sebastian. Brett is sick of Cohn, but Cohn feels the complete opposite about her. Jake insists Brett will marry Mike Campbell, an alcoholic Scotsman whom she also nursed back to health during the war. Jake plans a fishing trip with Bill in southern France. Mike and Brett ask if they can join the fishing trip, and Jake agrees. They also decide to attend the fiesta in Pamplona, Spain, and watch the bullfighting. Jake and Bill pass a peaceful 5 days in southern France, fishing and playing cards. The rest of their friends never show up. Brett and Mike are running late, as usual, and Cohn has decided to stay behind in Bayonne, France, to wait for Brett. They are all reunited in Pamplona, where Mike, Cohn, and Jake vie for Brett's attention. Jake, a bullfighting aficionado, is introduced to a promising new bullfighter, Pedro Romero, a 19-year-old with incredible talent. Jake notes Romero's charm and good looks. During the first day of bullfighting, Romero excels. Brett claims she's in love with him. Brett and Romero spend the night together. In the climax of The Sun Also Rises, when Cohn learns of this, he snaps, calling Jake a pimp and knocking him out with a devastating blow. He also attacks Mike and beats Romero nearly senseless, though manly man Romero refuses to stay down. After the fight, Jake finds Cohn lying face down and crying in his hotel room, ashamed of his behavior. In the falling action, the fiesta ends, and that means no more bullfighting or drama within their group. Jake soon receives an urgent telegram from Brett asking him to meet her in Madrid. Romero has left, she says, at her request. She claims he wanted to marry her, but she has never been interested in a domestic life. But she claims she will return to Mike. But she notes that she and Jake could have had a wonderful life together. In the resolution of The Sun Also Rises, Jake bitterly responds, "Yes, isn't it pretty to think so?" rebuffing Brett's idea of a beautiful life. 6 characters and their hard-drinking drama typifies the lives of the lost generation in Ernest Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises. Jake Barnes was injured during World War I, resulting in his impotence. During his recovery, he fell in love with his nurse, Brett, but because of his injury, they cannot consummate their relationship. Like many young people after the war, Jake is disillusioned and depressed. He moves to Paris to live as a writer, but he essentially spends his time drinking and partying. As a member of the lost generation, Jake focuses on distracting pleasures such as food, drink, and travel to fill a spiritual void. Lady Brett Ashley inherited her title from her husband, a British lord, whom she's divorcing as the novel opens. Brett, like many in the lost generation, experienced trauma during the war. She was a nurse in a military hospital. Brett derives great pleasure from male attention and enjoys having men compete for her affection. She pushes back against social expectations at every turn. She keeps her hair short, sleeps with anyone she likes, and ignores social niceties such as showing up on time. But despite her free-spirited ways, she constantly complains of feeling miserable. Jake seems to think he could make her happy, if not for his impotence. But the way Brett treats him suggests otherwise. Narrator Jake depicts Robert Cohn as petulant and childish. He is easily controlled by a strong woman like Brett. Cohn has a brief affair with Brett, but he refuses to see the dalliance for what it is. He follows Brett around and pines for her, attempting to maintain a relationship when she quickly loses interest. He is the opposite of the masculine type Jake feels Brett needs. Jake disrespects Cone for this perceived weakness, though he also views Cone as less than a real man because he never served in the war and because he is Jewish. 19-year-old bullfighter Pedro Romero embodies the masculine ideals Jake values. Romero is a bullfighting prodigy who understands the dangerous animals more intimately than any of the other fighters do, and he gives audiences a real thrill rather than the illusion of one. Brett is immediately attracted to Romero's passion and claims to love him, but Romero tries to change Brett into a more traditional woman, so she leaves him, claiming she's afraid of destroying him. Bill Gorton enters the story drunk and forgetful, and he mostly stays that way, bringing a touch of humor to the proceedings, often soothing rising tension between the other men, all of whom are competing for Brett's affection. Because Bill doesn't take part in this competition, it's possible he is gay. Jake feels free to make himself vulnerable with Bill, telling him things he would never discuss with the other characters. Mike Campbell is Brett's fiancé, yet the details of their relationship are somewhat confusing. Mike stays with Brett despite her constant cheating and disrespect, even allowing her lovers to join them on vacation. The novel implies Mike drinks to forget what he's seen on the battlefield, which he never discusses, or the fact that he's completely bankrupt. But his self-pity and anger toward Brett also likely influence his drinking. Bullfighting and water are the powerful main symbols racing through Ernest Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises. Bullfighting dominates the second half of the novel and symbolizes the fraught relationships among Cone, Jake, Mike, Romero, and Brett. Throughout the novel, Brett antagonizes the men into fighting for her affection, symbolizing the way bullfighters flaunt the red flag to antagonize the bulls into a fight. If Brett is the metaphorical bullfighter, the men are bulls, with emasculated Jake acting as a steer, which is a castrated bull. See, in bullfighting, the steers herd the bulls together after the run. This is a lot like the way Jake, who cannot have sex with Brett, works to keep the group of friends together, perpetually at Brett's beck and call, making travel plans and inviting men who are competing for Brett's affection to join them. After the running of the bulls in Pamplona, Jake and his friends assess the bull's strength and aggressiveness, two traditionally masculine characteristics. This mirrors the way Jake assesses each of Brett's suitors to judge whether they are worthy of her affection. According to Jake, Cone is unworthy of Brett, and this fuels Jake's anger toward Cone. Jake deems the Count and Mike both passably masculine, maybe because they're both veterans. But the only man truly worthy of Brett is the bullfighter Romero, whom Jake actively helps Brett attract. In and out of the ring, Romero is the most masculine, and he's handsome, full of youth and vitality, honorable and talented. But in the end, Romero is heartbroken. Just as the strongest and most aggressive bull can be killed by a skilled bullfighter in the end, Romero falls to Brett. Water in The Sun Also Rises symbolizes purification, physically and emotionally. Jake, bitter and hopeless after the war, spends his days searching for distraction in small pleasures. And the only time he feels truly at peace is in nature, specifically in or near water. He fishes in Borghete with Bill, and this mini vacation is the happiest in the novel. And it's the only time Jake sleeps peacefully. Jake and Bill spend their days in the sun and in the stream. He spends far more time describing the landscape than he does describing Brett. And after leaving the stress of Pamplona, Jake is eager to get back to the purifying water in San Sebastian. The water was buoyant and cold. It felt as though you could never sink. In the water, Jake is at peace. Nothing can weigh him down. But water means purification to Brett as well, represented by her frequent bathing. She often uses bathing as an excuse to escape social situations or to explain why she runs perpetually late. Her bathing sessions frequently follow romantic liaisons. For example, when she returns from San Sebastian, where she had an affair with Cone, she says she can't meet with Jake. Haven't bathed. Michael comes in tonight. Must clean myself. Brett's perpetual bathing signals a kind of remorse over her promiscuity. She feels compelled to wash away her guilty feelings. The Sun Also Rises was written in Ernest Hemingway's trademark, simple, straightforward style, but it's densely packed with profoundly meaningful themes: the effects of war and disillusionment, masculinity, and escapism. The protagonist Jake's generation, veterans and civilians alike, struggled to find meaning after the devastating events of World War I. Jake, Brett, and Mike were actively involved in the war and emerged disillusioned from their experiences. Many young people joined the war as an act of patriotism, believing their sacrifices would mean something, but their experience was the opposite. They braved the battlefield only to be slaughtered by machine guns or killed by poison gas. Most of those who made it home did not keep their idealism intact. The war destroyed many people's notions of morality and religion, forcing them to look elsewhere for guidance. Many in this lost generation, represented by the main characters of the novel, turned to carnal desires: food, sex, alcohol, to fill the void inside. World War I also applies to the theme of masculinity. In the face of the war's indiscriminate violence, strength, courage, and grit counted for little and left many of the men who fought in it feeling emasculated and empty. Surviving the brutal war was not a sign of heroism or strength. It was simply a matter of luck. Jake bears this emasculation physically as well as emotionally. His war injury makes sex, and therefore a full-fledged relationship with Brett, an impossibility. Jake claims not to be bothered too much by the injury, but his heavy drinking and obsession with masculine sports, such as boxing and bullfighting, suggest otherwise. Jake's friends similarly hide their insecurities and hurt egos by drinking heavily, chasing sex, and watching violent sports. Additionally, Mike is broke, Bill may be gay, and Cone is lovesick and Jewish, which the other men, all anti-Semitic, view as a mark of inferiority. Each is emasculated in his own way. The most traditionally masculine character in the novel is Pedro Romero, the 19-year-old bullfighter. Brett also exemplifies masculinity in the way she dresses and how she uses and discards the men in her life. Escapism is the final theme. To cope with or cover up their disillusionment after the war, the characters escape, literally and figuratively, living as expatriates, having left their home countries to search for meaning elsewhere. Paris is now their home base, but they also travel to Spain. Neither place seems to bring them much pleasure. They especially escape from alcohol, drinking excessively, which often leads to blackouts or fights. No one wants to speak openly about what they feel, so they bury their emotions at the bottom of a bottle. Brett uses romantic relationships to escape too. She is regularly swept into romantic images of a relationship with Jake, Mike, Cone, and Romero, moving from man to man as she desires. But she has no interest in committing to anyone. In this way, the theme of escapism divides between genders. The men escape the horrors of war and the gender expectation of heroism. Likewise, Brett escapes the gender expectation of diffidence and domestic bliss for women. Alcoholism and sex are the vices that are the central motifs in The Sun Also Rises. To escape the horrors of war, personal defeats, and overwhelming disillusionment with the world, all characters in The Sun Also Rises are heavy drinkers. Jake summarizes his alcoholism best when he says, "Under the wine, I lost the disgusted feeling and was happy." Drinking allows characters to escape their reality and gives them freedom of speech to discuss topics otherwise considered rude or inappropriate. And alcohol is a constant. Characters are either drunk, searching for the next drink, or hungover. Sex proves to be a motif that's a devastating force in The Sun Also Rises, creating momentary excitement, much like a bullfight, and similarly, leaving behind a wake of destruction. This motif is explored almost entirely through Brett's many relationships, as she flits from man to man, searching for excitement and validation, but never settles down with anyone, not even her fiancé. When Brett moves on, she leaves broken hearts, Cone, lost friendships, Jake, and damaged careers, young Romero, in her wake. The only man Brett truly considers settling down with is Jake, which would be impossible because of his impotence. Thus, sex, or the lack of it, destroys their relationship as well.